Okay, so this is our video lecture for the first three chapters of Souls in Transition. So I'm going to talk about the introduction, chapters 1 and 2, and then actually I'm going to tell you what you're missing out on by not reading chapter 3. The learning outcome for these chapters is to be able to discuss the context of emerging adulthood and possible implications in connection with religion. The purpose of this book is to investigate what happens as young people enter and start to move through emerging adulthood, particularly in regards to their religious and spiritual lives. So I want to talk a little bit about the data. I was hoping to focus more on this semester, but this is just one thing that I've cut out. But I do want to talk about their research methodology. And I will say I am biased. I love this study in the way that it's structured. I've spent a lot of time looking at the questions that they asked and reading books and articles that have come out of this study. I find it really fascinating, especially in terms of their methodology. So this is from the National Study of Youth and Religion, the NSYR. And we looked at some of this data in our gender data module. And I've got a link to the study if you're interested in finding out more about it in their website. In terms of the study itself, not just our book, but the study itself, that's what I want to talk about. It's got the big picture in terms of quantitative and nationally representative data. So the data started being collected in 2002, and then it went on for 10 years, and they did 4 waves of data collection. But it's nationally representative. But then this is a study that represents mixed methodologies. So they did their nationally representative telephone surveys, but then they interviewed a subsection or a subsample of the teens. And they did this at every wave of data collection. So they've got both the generalizable national, survey questions, quantitative data, and they've got the subset of qualitative findings as well. And it's longitudinal data. So that means that we can look at causality, why stuff happened, and we can see how specific people change over time. And they interview the same people over time too with the qualitative data. So it's not just quantitative changes over time, but looking at specific people's lives and how they change over time in their interviews. So they have 4 waves of data collection between 2002 to 2012. So how did they collect their data? They started with surveys. They were telephone surveys. They used a method called random digit dial, which is a well-known method in sociology. And then they did what's called in-house subject randomization. If you want to learn more about their methods, it's in the appendix. But this is just a brief summary for you all. And so because you might think about, one particular household, there might be multiple teens in the household. And so they used subject randomization to pick which kid in the household to interview. So they interviewed at wave 1, 2002. They interviewed 1 teen, so it's someone between the ages of 13 to 17, and then 1 parent in that household as well. This is something too, this is a pretty big deal because it is harder to study people under the age of 18 because they're minors, they're a protected population. So having data from this group of folks is really unique, or I guess it's not like super unique, but it exists. But it is less normal, I guess, less common. All right, so in terms of their surveys, here's kind of the layout here. Looking at each wave of data, when the data was collected, how many, what their initial numbers were, and then subsequent, percents of respondents, people, dropped out, and then the ages of the respondents. And you can just calculate the ages, based on the subsequent years. And so I won't go through that each one of those. And then contrasting this with the interviews here. So again, each wave of data, I guess I've got the ages listed here, and some more details about that. What our book is going to focus on is wave 3 data that was collected in 2008 when the youth were between the ages of 18 to 23. So this is the age category that they call emerging adults. So anytime you see that term emerging adults, it's throughout the text, know that it represents this age category. All right, so emerging adults. So first of all, I want to talk about a little bit, just some ideas of these macro social changes that have created this phase in life. So if you've taken social family, or maybe you've studied this in other classes, this idea that adulthood, what does adulthood mean? This is socially constructed, that this is a particular phase in life. And so they're trying to point out some of the unique, like, historical context of this age. So first of all, we've seen a dramatic growth of higher education in this, for this age group, that folks are continuing their formal schooling into their 20s. And so this is helping to create this idea of this emerging adulthood, that they're not fully independent yet, and they're continuing this education. Secondly, a delay of marriage. And so folks are continuing to delay marriage. I mean, beyond, obviously, in 2008, it was a little bit earlier, but now we see folks, the mean age of first marriage, not till their late 20s. And so, this younger, 18 to 23 years of, most folks aren't married here. We also see a lack of stable, lifelong careers. Now folks have different pathways to their careers. They have different trajectories. It's not like it was, 50 years ago, 30 years ago even, where maybe you got one job out of college and you stayed with that job until you retired. That's just not part of our social context right now, not part of our labor force context. We've had a lot of ups and downs. We have down right now. And so this is impacting our ability to have stable, lifelong careers. And then fourth, we've got the parents' increased willingness to financially support their children. So rather than forcing them to be financially independent, we see them continue to support them, either giving them money for school, housing, or having the kids live at the parents' home. We see these historically unparalleled freedom to roam, for kids to just be more trying things out. They have a lot of instability, and they're just trying new things. All right, so I wanted to identify, or just go over a few of the themes from the interviews. If you go through all those sub-themes in the first section of chapter 2, they identify 34 of them, as well as some alternatives to, like, the main theme. And I'm not going to talk about all of them. But I just want to highlight a few. So first of all, they really talk about how there are so many transitions in emerging adulthood now, that life, and kind of similar to what I just said in the previous slide, life is no longer steady and stable like previous generations have experienced it. There's a lot of transitions, and that kind of helps underscore what folks are experiencing at these times. And I want to say too that these themes from the interviews, these are like descriptive, statistics. They're not statistics, but they're descriptive analyses. These are things that appeared in a lot of their 230 interviews in wave 3. These are commonalities across interviews, and then some of those alternatives too. And so just wanted to say that as well. Secondly, there's throughout these themes, there's a real importance of the individual. So several themes identify the value of individuality, such as standing on their own, no regrets. It's hard to see an objective reality beyond the self. It's up to the individual, helping others, submerged in interpersonal relationships. And so a lot of these have to do with the importance of, the individual, the importance of me. Things like in terms of the no regrets section, they talked about protecting the personal self. And this seems really almost sacred to emerging adults. The threat to the ultimate good of being yourself, this idea of just be true to who you are. This is a real a value among emerging adults. And also the idea of, we can't tell people what to do. Everyone has to discover life on their own. Another theme, kind of similar to this, has to do with relativity. So this comes through in a few sections here. This idea that there's a lack of universal rules, which, if you think about religious groups, especially more conservative ones, they have a lot of rules. So this is a place where these two kind of cultural worlds collide. And I thought it was funny that Christian Smith talks about how all emerging adults are social constructionists, even though they don't know it. That they've got these ideas that, my truth is different than your truth. Everything is relative. They also strategically manage their risks. So they talk about how there's some rational thinking going on here. For some folks, there's some alternatives there too. But that only a few emerging adults are willing to adopt a lifestyle where they achieve absolute minimal risk at the expense of dramatically reducing fun. And so there is somewhat of the rational thinking, but not like complete eliminating all those risks. All right. Whoops. So what I've got here, it says, all right, implications. Why does the context matter? So sorry, I'm going to pop back up there. So why does the context matter here? So the goal of this study is not just to explain social life. So that's the description level. And we can, and that's important too. It's interesting to learn about, but to produce meaningful interpretation is the goal, to help explain why do people do what they do, especially in relation to religion. And this is the analysis level here. And like I said earlier, we can do more of this because of our longitudinal data. We have some statistical power here. So what they're going to talk about too throughout the book is the idea of these social causal mechanisms. So this means social dynamics that causally produce changes in social life. And the longitudinal analysis allows us to do this. Why are these things happening? Why are we seeing the findings that we're seeing? In terms of the second part of chapter 2, they talk about all these social causal mechanisms. So I am going to go through each one of these because this is a little bit more important than just the description. So first of all, they talk about disruptions. So transitions typically negatively correlate with religious practices. And recall there that term negative correlation means that when one thing goes up, the other thing goes down, right? And so the more transitions they're experiencing, the fewer religious practices they're participating in. And so religious faith is usually associated with having a settled life, and tends to be disrupted by social, institutional, and geographical transitions. And transitions break patterns and routines. Think of a routine that was broken when you moved to college. Think of a routine that was broken when you had to, do all this change for COVID-19, Transitions drain your resources, it drains your attention, it exposes you to new people and new social networks. And so there's lots of positive and negative things about it. But though all of those types of transitions really disrupt the folks' participation in religion. Secondly, they talk about distractions. So life gets really busy, especially at this time in life. And doing religious stuff takes time and energy. They talked about going to church, praying, participating in religious activities. And emerging adults have lots of stuff going on in their lives. They have lots of stuff to distract them. They're busy with their school, they're busy with their work, they're busy with their social life, they might be busy with their family. They're staying up late on Saturday night, so it makes it hard to get up and go to church on Sunday morning. They're learning skills like grocery shopping and paying bills. They're learning to stand on their own 2 feet. And so if religion is going to compete with these things, it has to take a pretty high priority in order for them to keep doing it. Third, they talk about differentiation. This time in life is all about discovering yourself. Who am I, and what is my life about? And this, of course, makes me think about PLU and how we talk about vocation. The quote of what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And so this is a time of discovery. And emerging adults are trying to figure out their own religious identity. They talk about how lots of folks retain their beliefs, but it's the practices that change. And so they might be continuing the faith that their parents taught them. And I think that's pretty expected by researchers. We've seen that in other readings that we've done too. But they might be trying to compensate for a loss of identity by other means, like marrying, getting married really young, moving away, starting a new career. And so, these are all things that contribute to figuring out who you are. Number 4 is the postponed family formation and childbearing. And so family and religion are really closely tied. And the more marriage and kids are delayed, the more religious involvement is postponed. Think too to what we know. They talk about it here too, but the idea that people go back to their religious identity once they've settled down, married, and had kids. So we've seen that already. Many parents want their kids religiously socialized, which we read about even among agnostic and atheistic parents, or a certain group of parents. And then the reverse is true too. The more religious someone is, the earlier they're going to marry and have kids. So if you're postponing that, you might be postponing your religious involvement too. Number 5, they found that one reason for things being the way they are is that that emerging adults are keeping their options open. The quote here was, "If religion means being sober, settled, and steadfast, then it's a part of settling down in the future. It's not a part of now. Now is about options, and I'll settle down later." Number 6 was honoring diversity. And so they talked about, and this ties back to the theme of individualization, that emerging adults are very good at individualizing, which would seem to align with the liberal mainline Protestants, but that's the group that's having the hardest time recruiting and retaining emerging adults. Emerging adults will be happy with religion as long as it accepts diversity in general. However, when we value everyone's diversity, this somehow ends up devaluing any particular difference. Point number 7 here has to do with optimism. So self-confidence and self-sufficiency. These folks are on their way to independence. So how does religion fit in when religion is all about dependence on God or faith or something greater? These two things don't fit together, and that's what they're finding here, that because they're so independent, self-confident, and self-sufficient, it results in having very little need for that dependence on God or religion. And so, these things the emerging adults have this feel a reduced need for religion. Number 8, they talk about self-evident morality. So emerging adults believe that the religion's purpose is to help people be good. But if morality is self-evident, if we should just all know what morality is, then religion isn't necessary to teach that, if we already know what it is. So religion just doesn't have a role there. Number 9, they talked about partying, hooking up, and having sex and cohabiting. And so if emerging adults want to participate in these things, and other things too that religious groups say you shouldn't do, then they're going to experience cognitive dissonance. So this is what happens, the term for what happens when you have these conflicting beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors that produces this mental discomfort. So they talk about that emerging adults have to resolve this cognitive dissonance somehow. So they could either choose to reject the behaviors, the partying and such. They can dramatically compartmentalize their life and deal with it that way, or they can be willing to live with cognitive dissonance there. I guess too with the first one, they could choose to just reject religion and go with the behaviors too. Just go, one direction or the other. So people might mentally discount religious teachings and socially distance themselves from the source. And then decide, maybe I'll be more religious when I settle down, when I stop doing these things, remember later in life. Number 10, religion provides a source of stability and recovery. And so they talk about how for some folks, they talk about how religion is a really good source for helping them deal with serious problems. It helps give them practices. It helps give them rituals. It helps keep them on track. It gives them new friendships and new communities to be a part of. And then finally, they talk about the ongoing relationships with parents. So that when people have good relationships with their parents who raise them as strongly religious, it encourages emerging adults to keep practicing their faith. So when parents have these high expectations, it also has consequences. People with troubled relationships with their parents might want to distance themselves from a non-religious parent by becoming religious. So they see this type of thing play out in different ways. All right, so what's in chapter 3? What are you missing? So I didn't assign chapter 3 just to kind of cut down on your reading. Obviously, you are welcome to read it. But it gives us some historical context, which is always important, of course. We have seen a decrease in religious participation over time in the U.S., but they're breaking down the trends here by looking at age trends in 2 different ways. So first of all, they're looking at how do emerging adults compare with older adults. So how are the folks in their 20s compared with, say, folks in their 40s and 60s and 70s and such. And then the second way is to how do age cohorts change over time. So looking at the idea of how were emerging adults in the 70s compared with emerging adults in the 2000s. So here are their overall conclusions here. First of all, they're demonstrating that younger adults are less religious than older adults when we look at those age differences there. And they do find some differences by religious tradition, that Catholic and mainline Protestant emerging adults are less religious on the other measures they talk about than evangelical Protestant and Black Protestants. But overall, they say that we're not becoming this hugely secular society, that we are seeing, when we look at these cohort trends, we are seeing relatively stable religiosity among emerging adults since 1972, except with the exception of frequency of weekly church attendance by Catholic and mainline Protestant emerging adults, which has gone down. But overall, they're trying to argue against this idea that society is completely different with these folks. Everything's changed and they're super secular. They're saying, no, not so much. It actually fits pretty well within the historical trends. All right, so that is your lesson for chapters 1 and 2, and a little bit on chapter 3. And I hope to see you later this week.